We welcome Vermont poet Ralph Culver and writer Jack Pulaski. This night will bring us a blend of poetry and fiction, Ralph reading recent works of poetry and Jack reading excerpts from his collection of novels and short stories. If you were listening to VPR around 4:50 this evening, you would have heard a segment following All Things Considered with an interview with Ralph and Mary Williams. Ralph and Jack have known each other for some 40 years, but this is going to be the first time that they've read together. One of the things that I have enjoyed about this particular series is that all of our poets have had a connection to each other. Each one, either through friendship, through writing, have shared a story. And I believe Jack and Ralph have a story also. They studied writing together at Goddard College, and their finished or public works have come later in their writing experience. For Ralph, the interest was a natural beginning, with a father who wrote fiction and a mother who had a PhD in English. His home was filled with books and without TV, so his love for writing and reading became very apparent during those years. Jack played hooky from junior high and found his books at the public library. And those books were his primary reading of authors such as Jack London, Theodore Dreiser, and John Steinbeck, swiftly determined the work and love of his life. As he says, his truancy was chronic and his reading voracious. Ralph was nominated for a Pushcart Prize. Jack received the Pushcart Prize. Ralph's concentration recently has been poetry. His chapbook, Both Distances, was published in 2013. Jack's focus on fiction has had a few novels, with his recent being Love's Labors, comprised of 4 stories and 2 novellas, was published in 2012. Vermont poet Ralph Culver's work has appeared in many magazines and journals over the years. He is author of the highly praised chapbook, of the highly praised chapbook, Both Distances, which for some reason I didn't write the title down for. He has been awarded funding from the Vermont Arts Council. Both have appeared in anthologies and reviews. There is excitement in their desire to write, and their work in its own individual way speaks of the dynamics of relationships between people. And as Ralph said in his interview, between people and the natural world. Please join me in welcoming Ralph Culver and Jack Pulaski.
I'm up first. Thank you, Shara. I'm the Ralph part of the show. There was a wonderful introduction. I don't want to really contradict you, but I had classmates when I was in 2nd and 3rd grade who would come up to me in school and who literally could not understand how I could survive. And we're talking about 1960 or something like that, when I was 8 years old. How could I survive without television? They just couldn't even comprehend that. So anyway, it helped me get into trouble with this stuff. I like to start any reading that I do with a poem by someone else whom I admire. And last year, it was tough for a guy my age who grew up really admiring a lot of poets whose work started to really gain a lot of attention in the 60s and the 70s. It was a hard year last year. We lost some really wonderful people, including our own Galway Connell, who I don't feel badly at all about saying our own. And Mark Strand, who is one of my favorites, and I'd like to read a poem of his that you've probably all read. It's one of his better known ones, but I thought because of the setting here in the library and because of, well, I'll just read this. This poem by Mark Strand called Eating Poetry. Ink runs from the corners of my mouth. There is no happiness like mine. I have been eating poetry. The librarian does not believe what she sees. Her eyes are sad, and she walks with her hands in her dress. The poems are gone. The light is dim. The dogs are on the basement stairs and coming up. Their eyeballs roll, their blonde legs burn like brush. The poor librarian begins to stamp her feet and weep. She does not understand. When I get on my knees and lick her hand, she screams. I am a new man. I snarl at her and bark. I romp with joy in the bookish dark. Thank you, Mark. So I thought I'd follow that. I'd start out with, this is a little poem called Fishing with My Father and the Craft of Poetry. Hours holding the poles over the water, hours of catching nothing or not much, and throwing back what we did catch. What the hell was that about anyway? And yet today I have this patience for things that drive some people crazy. Standing in line at the supermarket, waiting for some fool blowhard to stop gabbing, searching for a coat button in the snow. The finely honed conviction that beneath this nothing is a deeper, richer nothing. Consecrating myself to the silence and then to what interrupts the silence. A couple of childhood poems. Taking bluegill at Lake Seneca. I grew up in western Pennsylvania in Pittsburgh, and my father was in the English department at Pitt for almost 40 years. And the only vacation that we ever took was for a week, and later on, as I got a little bit older, we actually went for 2 weeks to this place called Lake Seneca in sort of south central Ohio, not too far from Pittsburgh. And so I spent a lot of interesting summers there, starting from a very young age until I was a teenager. Taking bluegill at Lake Seneca. Under the weight of a few rocks and the unmerciful heat of midday, they lie, 8 bejeweled beauties, aligned on the edge of the dock, the first 5 utterly still, the 2 next murmuring at the gills, and the last not quite reduced to commentary, but yet in the veil of acts and action. A tremor shudders his length to the tail, the caudal fin, taut and quaking. And I suddenly feel a memory fall through me of what it meant to consider surrender, remembering swimming for shore on a dare, our rowboat out too far, and the sound of thunder nearing. A limitless pain and fear deep in my thighs and calves, so pathologically engraved there, I stare down at my bare legs in wonder and laugh. But I am young, and so these fish are young. This water with its battered skin is young. The trees surrounding young. Even my father and mother are young. Soon the 8th captive is left no belief in escape, but speaks instead his conviction of infinite release. I will not be the one to flay them naked or scuttle the flawless heads in the minnow bucket for the coons. I will not touch them again, except to eat them. So speech is mine. The first words are small and have a taste of hook. the sting of a pearl of wine. This poem is called Boy at the Plate. I grew up in Pittsburgh, was in love with the Pittsburgh Pirates from a very young age. This poem's dedicated to, and I played a lot of baseball when I was a kid, which my own children, by the way, who were soccer players, were astonished to find that when we played Little League Baseball where I grew up in Pittsburgh, the parents didn't go to the game. There were no parents around. I mean, the only adult on the diamond was the umpire, and that was probably like some high school kid. Anyway, so this poem's dedicated to my children and my parents. Boy at the Plate. Spread, the boy's legs are unsteady as tent poles in a squall. It is useless to tell him, I know what this is, waiting on someone who seems as near as the end of his reach to give him his chance at shame, that he hardly believes it is himself. I heard that voice in my head so many times it became a weapon, the only weapon I had. It is useless to tell him the same voice splits from the throat of the field mouse, rearing up to teeth as long as its own forelegs. Useless and wrong. For now, the boy must believe he stands in the mouth of the first fear birthed in the world. Later, in time, perhaps while watching his own and shaken by the glory of it that it is, he will see for himself the common fear, the common love he fell out of, now into, and watch and love and be thankful. This is a poem called A Go at the Lifting Stone, which I have taken to dedicating to Sidney Lee, who is still our poet laureate. Is he not? Have they announced his successor? I don't think so. Anyway, the epigraph for this poem is from Fred Pitkin's History of Marshfield, Vermont, which was published in 1947. And I read these two sentences in this, it's not even a book really, but in this paper. And I couldn't get them out of my head because I just knew what they would lead to. So this is A Go at the Lifting Stone. Here's the quotation from Fred Pitkin's History of Marshfield, Vermont, 1947. For many years, a nearly round granite stone about 2 feet in diameter sat at the easterly corner of the front steps of the store now owned by Frank E. Brown. Few men in the town could lift it off the ground. The hands, arms, shoulders, and back consult briefly. A new challenge of some dimension, of serious intent. Promise heaves in the brain. This is our provincial glory. The bet down, budget, and you won't have to buy your own beer for a week. You think, in a sense, your future lies bearing its secret under the stone. The days breaking in your favor or not, an equation of space, its possibilities, conjuncting with the flesh and its limitations, all borne up forever on the skin of the earth, a place that seems suddenly new and somehow getting younger by the minute until you have the confirmation you seek. By God, you are about to learn something, this being your sole duty. And you learn something, sure enough. Next day, when the usual warriors clap you on the armored brace, your lips roll back like a dog's, the bloody thing having not given an inch. The sudden multitude of flea-like urgencies in your ankle you would rather die than bend to attend to. Closing your eyes to this, and the uncompromising grins stretched across the faces of these yahoos buying you beer after beer after beer.
So you actually lived
No, the speaker didn't actually lift it. The speaker blew out his back trying to lift it, but of course, the next day, everybody's buying a beer anyway, so. Yeah. No, I wish I could say the speaker of the poem had actually lifted up the stone, but.
It wasn't injured.
The next poem is another Vermont poem. This is called For the Last Catamount. It wasn't until just a few years ago that I guess the agencies that do these things officially pronounced the eastern mountain lion as extinct, which is a heartbreaking thing. I mean, any way that you measure it, although there are still people who swear that, I mean, there are still sightings reported of them. So this is a poem called For the Last Catamount, and I think its occasion is pretty obvious. The round, descending eye of fire narrows down the gunsight valley. A hawk hangs perfectly still, then sheers toward the river. Day heavy, lazing on a warming rock, the gold head of teeth and thick-lidded opals shifts, yawning under the sun's attentions. Her paws go soft now. She dozes. Skirling black flies and the quick water's reassuring purl meld to a rustle of parting growth. She recognizes what can only be summoned in dreams, his likeness driven from and nearing her. He stands in wait by the trees. Night and hunger, one being, will fall soon enough, patiently hunting the mouth of the river to follow the valley upstream. She wakens without expectation. Water, kill, sleep, the passing light, the labors of a daily birth in a world of endings. This poem, the occasion for this poem was a wedding in my family, my cousin Pete. It's called Wedding House. My room's empty, one and the next, as you step from my embrace into your own. Willingly, I surrender these lives I have sheltered in my aging toward a final aspect of place and silence, that you build your own way on loving, though I empty. No wonder even the poem grows speechless, the lines closing on themselves, your hands closing over another's. I enjoy writing haiku and other sort of Eastern forms, very short. I'll just read a couple of those. Hush, cricket, I'm lying here trying to worry. The silence between us is all she talks about. This poem is called The Song Museum. Here are the rooms of the ones that moved you. Across the hall, the gallery of the catchy but not crucial. The guards' coats sprinkled with tiny guitars. Here are screen shows for each of us, where we were, what we were doing, the first time we heard particular numbers. A sign reads, "Key in title." And the conversation, that low melody, surprising how sorrowful it often is. When she left me, it was so bad I couldn't stand to even listen to the radio. The Hendricks room is silent, wood benches where we sit. wondering. Here's another Vermont poem. Sundown coming, and the hummingbird is called home. 1. How suddenly the air has cooled. Rain gives thanks and joins its forebears, plunging drop by silver drop into the trout pond. As the sky clears, stars begin to follow in the paths of the rain. 2. Somewhere, molded from leaf bits and bound around with caterpillar web and the beard silk of tall grasses, a cup the size of a vole's bedroll trembles in the fork of a slender bough, cradles 2 eggs. They glint like lost beads of a child's bracelet. Embers from the fire spark downward, stutter and whisper to the attentive earth by where these boots stand, drying. A couple more. I had hoped that oh yeah, it is here. I had told, I'll get a little more sort of a human interaction here, human and human interaction. This poem, I told Jack I would read it and dedicate it to him tonight. This poem's called Last Call. Believe me, this poem really is from personal experience. Last Call. What the mind fashions, what the mind does not, she says, but no way I'm being sucked into that dialectic. A freezing wind follows someone through the door and claws its way up the inside of my pant legs, finishing the job that her voice had begun an hour before of dismantling my sense of ease and rightness in the evening. The bar is half empty. This was long enough ago that you could still smoke while sitting at your table, and I light one as she slowly drains another shot of ouzo, the achingly deliberate rolling of her wrist, then the equally precise wiping of the back of the other wrist across her mouth. In fact, this was long enough ago that I had already stopped drinking, or better, that drinking had clubbed me into abstinence. And I suddenly vividly recall a night in the same bar, a more distant time and woman sitting there across from me, when in disgust I had watched myself strain to complete a sentence with a full 10 seconds plodding by between each sodden word I spoke. She beckons to the waitress, coral smeared across her knuckles. And now, she says, the mind fashions that you will drive me home, and the mind does not fashion that you will sleep with me. If this be youth with its glory passing into shade, I think, give thanks. Its dissolution overdue. She reaches for my cigarette and knocks the empty shot glass over. A couple more here. I've been writing actually little prose poems lately. This is called Tableau. I don't know what to say about a prose poem except that it's a poem that just doesn't have line breaks. Tableau. Sitting at his desk, a man stares at a sheet of paper rolled into a typewriter. A few words are there, nothing substantial. Across the room, a boy lies on his stomach on the floor, head propped up on his left hand, drawing in a sketchbook with his right. So far, only a line or two, just a suggestion of a shape. And the third figure in the room, whose very form is nascent, untroubled by detail, nearly transparent, really. Although the man and the boy sense a presence, acknowledge it, they pay it no mind, confident as they are, as you are reading this, as I am writing it, that now is not the time the figure congeals, casting a shadow at last, and rises to take his measure. This poem's called Bargainers. In the market, Saturday, the world's commerce on the simplest terms, terms anyone can understand. Hanks of dried chilies like garlands of tongues, baskets of Roma tomatoes in the noon sun, warm and firm to the touch. A young man leans against the stone facade of the pastry shop under the shade of a window awning. He's trying to catch the eye of the girl selling the tomatoes, while an old couple haggles with her about the price and when the tomatoes were picked. The young man lights a thin cigar. It's black, slightly bent, as though he were setting fire to an oak twig in his mouth. He shakes out the match and snaps it into the street in one movement, a gesture he had seen in a film as a child and never forgotten. Some actor in a narrow tie and lapels and black-framed sunglasses. A doomed hero, not too bright really, although this hadn't mattered in the least. Sheer determination and purpose, that was what counted. The details of the story, the movie's title, a movie as old as the young man's parents, maybe older, all that's forgotten. As every Saturday, the girl sees the boy clearly. A blossom of flame, the matchstick spinning out of the shadows and into the sunlight. Even now, as she tries to reassure the couple the tomatoes are fresh. On the vine this morning, she repeats. Two thick ropes of smoke begin idly paying out the boy's nostrils, braiding upward in the midday stillness. And then, in one movement, she snaps a paper bag open and begins to fill it with tomatoes as the old couple points. This one, this one, this one. And I'll finish up with a couple of sort of winter pieces that, we live in Vermont, and the last two winters, I think in particular, have just been absolutely brutal. And, I'm in my 60s, and I'm thinking, how long can I put up with this? And then at dinner tonight, Marge said, but then look, here it is. It's June. You're in Vermont. You look out the window. Why would you want to be anywhere else? So maybe these two poems will cool us off a little bit. This is called Signed Self-Portrait, February. Knee-deep amid the clamoring snows, the old broom at parade rest in my grip, icebound. I remark with odd admiration the gray rampart, the city plow blade grades across the mouth of my driveway. From the porch roof by an empty suet cage, a downy woodpecker goads me with a glance. Well, he can wait a moment, and so can my shovel, wherever it may be under all this whiteness. With these bristles, seasons past have frayed and fretted to a bevel, the broomstick vertical. I brush the only Chinese ideogram I know, increasing joy, into the surface of the snow beside the roses, patiently waiting in their burlap robes. This poem's called To March. To March. Cutting carrots for soup, I'm distracted by the trees outside the window, their branches making sweeping gestures through pale air half an hour before sundown. Officious, yet somehow disinterested, the somber limbs directing, urging us to move more quickly past the scene of some disaster or other and go about our business. And I think, that's March, isn't it? They stand, the trees, above cracked plates of snow that looked like a pile of slate shingles just tumbled off a truck and spilled around the trunks in shards. But that's March too. The declining sunlight suddenly flaring up across a glaze of ice that appears without warning at a bend in the road. This unavoidable fact about yourself and the moment. And you realize, as you turn the steering wheel smoothly into the skid, that you are at ease with the prospect of any possibility. Everything in the bed shifts as you hit dry pavement and then goes cascading. The whole load thunders overboard. But you've stopped. Stopped. Somehow you're on all four tires. And when you climb out of the cab, there is the wind, that storied, oft venerated wind, moaning and clawing at your throat, a lover who wants you or wants you dead. Maybe both. Probably both, I think. Looking across the snow crust, gathering murk as dusk settles in. Winter each day just a bit more distant. Each day itself just a bit longer and brighter than the last. And return to the comfortable heft of the knife. The kitchen sweetened by steaming broth and promise. Another seeming catastrophe survived. Thank you very much. Did you want to just keep going? Okay. You want me to turn? It is my very great pleasure to introduce Jack Pulaski. It is a sobering thought for me to realize that I have known this man for 45 years. I first met him, I came to Goddard in 1970, a kid who knew nothing, just that I wanted to write. And he at the time was the manager of the Goddard College bookstore and went on to a good teaching career there and taught at many other places. He is a marvelous fiction writer. He grew up in Brooklyn, New York, which in the days when you were there was a lot different than the Brooklyn, New York that we read about in the New Yorker today. He's a wonderful fiction writer, a dear friend, and I just please welcome Jack Pulaski.
Thank you, Ralph. Hearing you read those poems, beyond the pleasure of it, I'm reminded once again that my poet friends continue to educate me. Thanks. I'm going to read excerpts from Love's Labors, which is a collection of 4 stories and 2 novellas. And the length of all the stories really preclude my reading an entire story. Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you. Okay. So what I thought that I would do is to read some excerpts from the stories and from a couple of novellas, and hope that they convey the sense of the world of these particular stories. And I hope it's an enticement. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to read about just 2.5 pages of a novella, which is titled El Damage. the Algren really refers back to the time when the traditional hypocrisy was still in force, and that is that a young woman who was unmarried but who had sex was somehow damaged goods. Right? So that's where we will begin. Another aspect of this particular story is that the 4 or 5 women in this story are all brilliant storytellers. And the main character, Bisabuela Consuelo, Bisabuela being Spanish for great-grandmother, very much like my mother-in-law, she could do what Gabriel Garcia Marquez could do extemporaneously. And she cost me a great deal of time because every time I'd be working on something, she'd tell a story and I would be so taken with the circumstance that I would try to write it, and most of the time I failed. So, but, my mother-in-law, I love the woman dearly. For the last year of her life, she lived with us, and we were taking care of her. And so we heard again yet other versions of the stories that she had been telling us for years. So there is Bisabuela Consuelo, there is Maria, her daughter, and then there's a grandchild, Alicia, and, well, I'll read it. I'll read it. Bisabuela Consuelo, my mother-in-law, is a month shy of her 99th birthday. She has been living with us for 3 years. My wife, Laura, is climbing the stairs to her mother's bedroom. Laura rarely complains, except for the pain in her knees. Still, if I put a Tito Puente record on the stereo, she can't resist dancing. No matter what activity she's engaged in, she moves beautifully, the girl inside the body betraying her, enchanting. Likewise, the trajectory of her stories as linear as the mambo, epics within the symmetry of each moving part, hips, knees, shoulders, belly and ass, and keen, dreaming head. Now she's trying to get a word in, temper the story her mother's telling, insinuate the truth or mitigate it, I'm not sure. Our daughter Maria has inherited her mother's gift for storytelling and is trying to interpose her version, perhaps for her daughter Alicia's sake, a hedge against destiny. Our granddaughter, who has completed her first year of college, listens avidly to the story she is heir to. She's been listening for years. It began not long after Little Red Riding Hood. She's overheard a lot and learned more eavesdropping. Later, she was captivated by the tales her mother couldn't, excuse me, I lost my way here. She overheard a lot, learned more eavesdropping. Later, she was captivated by the tales her mother couldn't resist telling. Maria replicated the richly broken English of Alicia's Puerto Rican and Russian Jewish great-grandmothers, the stories of each fantastic, horrible, and funny. I hear them upstairs in Bisabuela Consuelo's bedroom, rowdy, laughing. So far, they are having a good time. The clamoring Scheherazads intrude on one another, claiming that the latest episode that each is ready to divulge is the news that will change our understanding of the story. Alicia struggles to stifle her laughter. Bisabuela allows Laura to interpolate while she pauses to bite a cookie with her two remaining teeth, one above and one below, aligned beneath the tip of her sharp nose. She says the two teeth are all she needs to defend herself against enemies. Bisabuela masticates the coconut cookie and meditates on the martyrology wherein her eldest sister, Teresa, also known as Tia or Titi, is preeminent. Titi passed on 5 years ago. She was 3 months shy of her 100th birthday. Bisabuela announces each time she wakes, day or night, that she is determined to live to 100. Moreover, the 3 months not spent by Titi are her inheritance, and the Virgin Mary is arguing her case to the Lord. In prayer, she reminds Mary that Titi was also a virgin when she passed from this world. To everyone within earshot, temporal or supernatural, Bisabuela declares that 2 of her octogenarian cousins can attest to the provenance of Titi's innocence. I imagine the relic membrane veiling Titi's maidenhood more authentic than the Shroud of Turin. But because Bisabuela isn't on good terms with her cousins, she has decided to testify in their behalf. She will say that when Teresa was 16, she was betrothed to 17-year-old Rudolfo. Rudolfo made promises but was seduced by and married his cousin Celia. Teresa came to the quick and emphatic understanding of the weak character of men, never married, remained pure, and was deeply involved in the raising of her sisters' and brothers' children, thus becoming Titi. Titi, as befits a virgin, was buried in a white bridal gown, but careless functionaries at the funeral parlor had allowed a man to wash her body in preparation for burial. Remediation for this injustice, Bisabuela claims, also accrues to her, and she is entitled to the compensation of the 3 months not lived by Titi and the better part of a year for the sacrilege of the man washing Titi's nude body. Laura says, but Bisabuela shouts, recuerda, in the United States, Titi went to night school for 3 weeks, long enough to learn to say in English, don't touch me. Okay. That better? That better? Okay. 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 I'm going to read just 3 pages of a novella titled The Patricide. This story does take place in the city. This city is now a very mythic place. Perhaps it was a mythic place even when I was living there. but it's taken me a long time to realize that. The story involves this young man who aspires to be a writer, although when we meet him in this part of the story, he is still a boy. His younger brother is schizophrenic, and in the course of their relationship, the younger brother's versions of the family stories are very crazy. They even distort the stories the young aspiring writer thinks he is writing. So there's a great deal of confusion going on here. And the other thing that occurs to me is that the city that I'm attempting to depict here, I remember a statement by Henry Miller. I don't remember which one of his books, but he made the statement, something to the effect that everything that is not said or expressed in the street is false. Now, within that hyperbole, there is a bit of truth. And that truth is that as I remember that particular world, there was a kind of maximum expressiveness, should we call it that, a kind of spontaneous opera, whether it was in the street, here are the secrets of my heart laid bare, etc. But I'm assuming, I do assume that human beings, even these human beings in this particular story, are quite capable of lying and lying to themselves, even if they're not capable of discretion. Anyway, I'm going to read the opening pages of this story. The memory insinuates itself, and again I'm back there trying to exonerate myself. The hot summer day, the mothers stacked on the tenement stoop, Mama perched on the top step, pregnant Aunt Zelda, her huge belly resting on her lap, sits close to Mama. She glistens with sweat, mouth gasping, her eyes closed. The other women are distributed below on the descending steps. Somebody's grandma sits on the middle step, fanning herself with a newspaper, nodding yes to everything she hears. Next to the babushka is a very young mother-to-be, a child herself who looks frightened. One lady cradles an infant in her arms. Another, near the pavement, reaches down and rocks a baby carriage. Me and my kid brother Josh are trying to hit a shiny new penny with a pink rubber ball. I'm 11, Josh 9. We stand a half a dozen paces apart, facing each other at the borders of the box sketched in chalk on the sidewalk. In the middle of the box is the penny we take turns trying to hit with the pink ball, while each of the women take a turn narrating the travail of childbirth. The woman with the baby in her arms recalls how, in the throes of labor, she cursed her husband. The lady rocking the baby carriage says that eventually she couldn't hear herself screaming and wonders if that deafness is in some way related to the amnesia that allows her to long for another child. Stout Mrs. Kozianowitz, the landlord's wife and janitor, emerges from the cellar, having pushed open the large metal doors of the bulkhead built into the sidewalk. She's hauled the last of the cans of trash from the cellar, lined them up at the curb, the brimming garbage cans haloed with buzzing flies. She pauses, wipes sweat from her eyes, and says, 5 I got. The first 4 came 2 at a time. My husband, the landlord, says, In and out, and boom, you're big as a house. I don't know whether he's bragging or complaining. But just in case, when he gets that look in his eye, I bring out his vodka, and that makes him sleepy, thank God. Meager Mrs. Chichko, who has diminished with the birth of each of her 6 plump babies, so that her house dress hangs like a shroud over her skeletal body, says of her husband Stanley's mysterious vanishings and appearances. He comes to the door with a bottle of milk I asked him to get 3 months ago and says, "Hello, heart of my heart, I'm home." I say to him, "Drop dead." He says to me, "I'm not in the mood." Aunt Zelda exhales in sympathy, puts her hands on her big belly, and nudges the weight onto her right thigh. Then, from the summit of the top step, I hear my mother announce, "My Ben was a miracle. He came so quick. I was on a gurney in the corridor of the hospital when he crowned. The nurse said it was the easiest birth she'd ever seen. And when I took him home, what a doll. He nursed, he slept, no problems. My Ben was a dream, but his brother Josh, boy oh boy, then I paid. I was in labor all night. Josh tore me to pieces, and that was only the beginning. When I took him home, he cried, he screamed, no matter what. From the minute he was born, I never had a moment's peace. But with my firstborn, I got a little lucky, she says, lowering her voice, fearful of being overheard by the demurge who can only create a conscience through punishment. I squirm hearing myself named in Mama's tribute and know Josh also listens. Maybe that's why I chased the ball into traffic, dodging the car that almost hit me. I can still hear Mama shriek. Inside the shriek, I'm no longer the blessing that marks my brother cursed. But in less than a moment, Mama was on her knees in the gutter, weeping, hugging my head to her bosom. Then she stood up, looked in the direction of the car that hadn't stopped, and in Yiddish wished cholera on the driver. In the same breath, she recapitulated in a scream the event that had hardly passed and was already a legend, grabbed a handful of my hair, yanked me onto the sidewalk, and remonstrated against heaven, just like his father. He'll put me early in my grave. God Almighty, he scared me out of 10 years of my life. And with her free hand, smacked me again and again, while her other hand clutched the hair on top of my head as she pulled me up the steps. The women sitting on the stoop moved to the right and the left to make a clear path. Aunt Zelda called to her sister, "Don't aggravate yourself." Josh trailed behind me and slipped the penny in my back pocket. Should I read more? Okay. I apologize to some of my friends who may have heard this before. It's about 3.5 pages, and this will be the last thing I'll be reading. In this particular story, I've tried to convey the experience of going to a particular movie house in Brooklyn that was known as the Dump. My grandmother, when I was very young, 6 or 7 years old, took me there for the first time. And of course, it seemed to me a magical experience. She prepared enough food to sustain me if I had been going to Europe. A jar of tea and pumpernickel with chicken fat smeared on it. And she gave me 2 cents for candy, etc. At this time in that neighborhood, there were many Roma people living in the neighborhood, and they usually lived in storefronts, etc. And they too were attended the movie, and not everyone, not every kid who was there bothered to use the urinal, who just relieved himself themselves wherever it was convenient. At any rate, I'm going to read the first part of the boy in this movie house, the dump, when he is quite young, maybe about 7 years old. And then I will have to pause, because there's a paragraph break that indicates the passage of time, and he has gone back to this movie house as an adolescent. Right? But here he is as a young kid. I watched Tarzan wrestle a crocodile. All the sounds of a jungle rose, bird calls trilled in the dark, elephants trumpeted, an amphibian roar swallowed the hours, and I munched on the pumpernickel smeared with chicken fat. Tarzan strangled the crocodile. I coughed. Breadcrumbs caught in my throat. My eyes teared. I took the last swallow of tea. My head jerked sideways, and again I saw the beautiful bandana gypsy lady sitting next to me, smoking her pipe and bouncing an infant on her lap. The baby began to cry. The gypsy lady opened her blouse and popped her breast into the baby's mouth. I put a raisin on my tongue. The baby sucked. My vision listed toward the gravitational force of the milk-filled moon. The baby sucked. I swallowed the raisin. The gypsy woman took her breast from the baby's mouth, the plum-colored nipple at my nose, bosom in her palm. She smiled and offered me a sip. I choked. Her smile widened into a gold mine, teeth giving off fireworks of light, clamped around the bit of her pipe, grinning, billowing smoke. Okay, so here's that young kid. Now he has returned to the movie, and he's an adolescent, and he and his pal, Hector Perez, attend this Saturday matinee every week. I learned, and like everyone else, quickly forgot the name of the movie house. It was simply known as The Dump. By the time I was 14, the Puerto Rican kids called it El Maito. I asked my pal Hector Perez what that meant. He said, a place where one may piss. Faithful, wedded to years of matinees, Hector and I attended every Saturday. The ambrosial stink was the same. Saturday morning in the lobby, Bubby's landsman was still there. The ticket taker no older than he had been the first time I saw him, still looking as though he'd just been fished from the sea. He tore the admission tickets in half. In the semi-dark of the theater, Hector and I and the packed audience waited for the show to start. Hector explained to the boy sitting behind him, who sneezed on his ear and refused to step outside, either you got valor or you a piece of shit. He had to shout to be heard over the stamping feet, clapping and whistling. The theater darkened. There was thunder outside and thunder in. On the screen, the wolfman stalked through the mist. Someone's hat was launched, a shadow lobbed again and again with cheers, the shape of some attenuated flying thing, wingless, passed through the projector's cone of light just in front of Wolfman's gnashing teeth. Wolfman menacing an old gypsy woman. Hector shouted encouragement and genuflected. Wolfman's furry brow metamorphosed with the waning of the moon to suffering, thoughtful flesh. The old gypsy woman escaped. I thought of my mother and father, each fearful of the other in their ordained madness. Meanwhile, a large, chaste, bumbling Lon Chaney Jr., subject to the merciless moon, begged to be locked up. Rage and carnage, some deer's test of his innocence. The howl came from the balcony. You pissed on my shoes. You pissed on my shoes and you say you're sorry? The sound of the scuffle coincided with the most pious moment. Wolfman dying into human form, the face contrite, at rest, a rapture of peace and death. Between the main features, we saw a Three Stooges comedy. I watched the Stooges bang one another over the head with hammers, heard the buffo tune of perpetual calamity, the mocking sound of horns at the end. A pocket of silence, surrounded by riot, traveled down the aisle. I turned to see what was passing. Hector turned. It was Cookie. She fingered the crucifix at her throat, pinky running over the body of Jesus, arms outstretched, pulsing on her throat. My face turned among the ranks of profiles, staring, mouth wide open. Cookie looked, laughed, and said, "What you doing, catching flies?" My ears burned. I closed my mouth and thought of Lon Chaney Jr. staring at the hair growing on his knuckles. "Aye, what a barbarity," Hector said, as he perused Cookie's spectacular anatomy in the tight skirt and sweater. Hector screamed, wailed through delight, horror, the permutations of all sexes. "Aye, Mommy, what a barbarity. A woman making such a show of what God gave her." Popeye quaffed a can of spinach. Buck Rogers traveled to a star. The sound system sounded waterlogged. Buck Rogers' voice gurgled. The dark shot through with beams of light. Bright blue threads of spring funneled through the holes in the roof. Illuminated flocks of galoshes and caps flying about, and cheers, pandemonium, gangs of boys limping wolfman-like into the aisle, wizards of peripheral vision. They lurked in the vicinity of Cookie. On the screen, a soldier of the French Foreign Legion staggered alone under the blazing sun. Love had sent him into the desert. The roof of the dump was porous as a sieve. All weather blew through the dark. I could smell spring and one unremitting wind of winter. Great thunder from outside. On the screen, the Legionnaire staggered across the Technicolor desert, crying, "Water, water." The rain came through the roof. My head soaked. I cried, "Water, water." The Legionnaire, crawling across the desert, cried, "Water." And everyone in the house taking up the cry, "Water, water," and a flood fell through the roof. That's it. Thank you.